Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy Kacer, and it's such a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about my writing. I'm going to be talking about a couple of my books and one in particular. I've written more than 25 books, and most of them focus on stories of the Second World War and the Holocaust. You have to know that this is very personal family history for me. Both of my parents were survivors of the Holocaust. My mother survived the war in hiding. I've written a couple of books about her, including The Secret of Gabby's Dresser and The Night Spies. And my father was a survivor of the concentration camps. So I write these deeply personal stories so that I can pass them on to young people like yourselves. So here you can see a selection of just some of the more than 25 books that I've written. I'm very proud of the writing that I do, and I'm very passionate about the writing that I do. And as I said, today I'm going to be talking about this book, a book called To Look a Nazi in the Eye, a Teen's Account of a War Criminal Trial. So this book focuses on the trial of this man, a man by the name of Oskar Groening. He worked in one of the worst of the concentration camps, a place called Auschwitz. He was actually known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. Jewish prisoners would arrive in Auschwitz from all over Europe, and they would disembark onto a platform where decisions were made immediately about whether they would go to their death or whether they would be granted life for a few minutes or a few days or a few weeks longer. It was there that Oskar Groening was assigned, and he would go through the luggage of the arriving Jews, collecting all of their valuables, and then sending all of those belongings to Berlin to bolster the coffers of the Third Reich, Hitler's collection of money and belongings. The trial of Oskar Groening was going to focus just on a 12-week period of time in 1944. And during that 12 weeks, there were about 450,000 Hungarian Jews, Jews from across Hungary, who were sent to Auschwitz. And of that number, of that 450,000, 300,000 went to their death. Oskar Groening was standing trial and was being charged with being complicit or responsible in some way for the death of those 300,000 Jews. I knew I didn't want to write this book alone, and so I reached out to a young woman who I met whose name is Jordana Lebowitz. When Jordana was only 19 years old, she decided that she wanted to travel to Germany on her own so that she could be a witness at the trial of Oskar Groening. She wanted to sit in that courtroom, hear the testimony of Oskar Groening, hear the testimony of other survivors who were also present. She wanted to be a witness to this history for her generation. Oskar Groening was not the only person who was going to be testifying at this trial. There were survivors of the Holocaust who were coming from around the world, and they were going to be getting on the witness stand in this trial, talking about their own experience of having been imprisoned in Auschwitz and talking about what it meant to lose their entire families. Those survivors included this woman, a woman by the name of Hetty Bohm, along with two of the gentlemen that you see in this photograph. The gentleman on the left, a man by the name of Bill Gleed, and on the very right, a man by the name of Max Eisen. The man in the middle is actually Thomas Walter. He was the prosecuting attorney at the trial of Oskar Groening. Hetty, Max, and Bill were committed to getting on the witness stand at the trial of Oskar Groening and telling the very painful stories of how they had been sent to Auschwitz with their family members and how they were the only ones of their family members to survive. So I want to actually read you a section from the book just to give you a sense of what it must have felt like for Jordana to be present in that courtroom watching this trial unfold. I'm actually going to read you from right in the very beginning of the book, the beginning sections of her impressions. So this is April 2015. Oskar Grunick, the man accused of aiding and abetting in the murder of more than 300,000 Jews in the Auschwitz death camp, was about to enter the German courtroom. Jordana was seated among the spectators awaiting his entrance. Her heart was thumping so hard it felt as if someone was drumming on her chest. Aiding and abetting. It was one of those expressions you only heard in television courtroom dramas, the kind of phrase that everyone recognized but no one really understood. Jordana had done her homework to unravel what it meant in real terms. The truth was, Oskar Groening had not directly murdered anyone. He had not fired a gun, dropped a canister of poisonous gas, administered lethal injections, or pulled the hangman's lever, and yet the lawyers were going to argue that he was as guilty as those who had. Aiding and abetting. It meant that through his position in the death camp, even though he was considered low in the chain of command, he had helped make the killings proceed in a smooth and efficient manner. The reporters' cameras were trained on a door at the front and side of the courtroom, ready to capture the moment when Oskar Groening would walk in and take his seat next to his lawyers. On the other side sat the Holocaust survivors, dozens of witnesses who had come from around the world. Jordana glanced over at Max, Hetty, and Bill, the 3 survivors from Toronto who were becoming her friends. Each one of them, along with many others, would be testifying later that week, telling the stories of how they had arrived in Auschwitz years ago with their families, only to be separated in the first hour. Each one would recount how they had watched mothers, brothers, fathers, grandparents walk in the opposite direction, not realizing that it would be the last time they would see them. Jordana was anxious for these elderly people and about what they were going to face in testifying. Hetty looked composed and stoic, Bill grim-faced, Max calm and resolute. The courtroom was packed. People were moving, fidgeting, talking. No one seemed ready to settle just yet. Outside, Jordana knew people would still be lining up to get into the courtroom to witness this piece of history that was about to unfold. Suddenly, the door at the front of the courtroom opened. Jordana sat straighter in her chair. This is it, she thought, with a sudden quickening of her breath. She was about to stare into the eyes of a Nazi. Would he have horns? Breathe fire? Look like a monster? She had no idea what to expect, except that she knew this moment was monumental. She grasped the arms of her chair and leaned forward. And then she gasped as an elderly man shuffled in. At 94, Oskar Groening was frail, small, and hunched over. He didn't look evil. He didn't look like the murdering Nazi that he was accused of being. With a complete exhalation of breath, Jordana thought, "He looks just like my grandfather." So remember, this is what Oskar Groening looked like when he worked in Auschwitz. Young, strong, proud member of the Nazi Party. And this is what Oskar Groening looked like during the trial. 94 years old, frail, weak, not in good health. He had to be led into court on a walker, leaning on the arm of his lawyer. At the end of the trial that lasted 3 months, he was charged with being complicit in the murder of 300,000 Jews in Auschwitz, and he was sentenced to 4 years. He actually passed away before he could serve that sentence. This book raises so many questions that I hope you have a chance to talk about at some point with your peers. Questions like, what does it mean to bring a 94-year-old man to trial so many years after the crime was committed? Or questions like, what does it mean to receive a sentence of 4 years for a crime of this magnitude? Or is there any sentence that can compensate for the murder of millions? Is there any sentence that can compensate for genocide? So that was just a small introduction to this very important book. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you have a chance to read this book or some of my other books. I hope at some point in the future you will have the opportunity to invite me into your classroom so that I can talk to you in greater detail about this story or about any of the other books that I've written. In the meantime, just to let you know, all the books that I've written are available for purchase on Amazon, at bookstores across Canada, and they can be ordered through my publisher, Second Story Press. So thank you for listening to me. I hope you continue to learn about this history. I hope you continue to remember this history. And I hope to meet up with you at some day in the future. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.